patrons, and welcome to a lesson on painting green skin tones. In today's lesson, we will be using a size 2 Artist Opus Series S brush, and I will also be using a, it's worn out, but the size 20 Artist Opus Series S. The paint colors I'll be using today are the Reaper Master Series Bones paint, Troll Hide. This is the color I used for the base coat of the miniature. Knoll Pelt, Buckskin Pale. I always use this one, but the label's super faded. I'm going to be using Chimera Colors Magenta and Yellow Oxide. Secret Weapon Old Rust. Scale Color Pink Flesh. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about painting green skin tones. For this guy, obviously, he's a goblin. He's from the Big Child line, the pirates that they have. And he's actually really cool. He's part of a bigger piece, and he's lots of fun, and he had a lot of nice green skin tones here that I could show you guys some techniques on painting these flesh tones. So before we get started, obviously you can see I have all of these colors, and it's just like when I paint regular skin tones. I like to add different colors to make things more interesting. So for those of you that are thinking, I'll just put some green on there and it'll be good for an orc or a goblin, a lot of times it's nice to kind of have the variety. So you can see that I've got these really bright, intense colors. And then I've also got just a regular flesh tone and a red here, kind of this reddish purple. For me, I think one of the key things to painting more realistic, if you could call it that for fantasy, skin tones is to add human flesh tones in there as well. And in this instance, I'm using the pink flesh because it's a nice complement to the greens. So these greens, this Troll Hide, which is the base color of my goblin here, it's a nice complementing color to that, contrasting the two colors. So what I'm going to be doing, and you'll see with the palette cam, is I'm going to be adding in some of these flesh tones to just make it less cartoony. If you are going for more cartoony, you can, omit the flesh tones here. But I would definitely still play around with yellows and tans. This magenta is a really fun color, and then this yellow oxide. So just something to think of. Even though I know we're using just a handful of colors, that you can use different colors. Always play around with the colors that you have on your desk, just to kind of mix things up. Okay, so I'm going to start off, and I'm going to take some of this Old Rust. I didn't mean to get some magenta in there, but that's okay. So I'm going to take some of this Old Rust, and I'm going to use it as a shadow color, just so I can make my shadows on this miniature a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to go up in here and just do a thin layer. I'm going to put some red in. I'll probably want to add a little bit of red, even though I'm going to go back over this. I still want some interest, so I'm going to add some colors before I even start, just kind of thinking about shadows and just giving a little bit more interest to that. So I'm going to hit kind of everywhere. You see darker areas on the insides of his feet, under his belly here, just to give everything a little bit more interest. Maybe a little bit on his knees and on his hand there. And once I've done that, I'm going to start working my way up. Of course, as I mentioned in every video, what I'm going to do is it's going to be all about layering and bringing the colors up with the layers. So, you know, I'll go from this darker color, I'll mix colors in. You'll see as I go with the palette, I'm going to mix stuff in into this lighter green color, probably some of the skin tone, and work my way up. Just to make, I want to make this less cartoony. And you can see how the skin tones kind of desaturate that green. The other great thing about goblin skin is, you know, you don't have to be, I'm not going to be super smooth with this. I am going to smooth areas, but it's kind of fun to just throw some colors in there, especially with these bigger miniatures, just to kind of build up your colors. And get some texture in there. His face is really delicate, so I'll go back with the smaller brush on his face. And you can see it dries, and it dries pretty, it's not as bright as when the paint is applied when it's wet. Okay, now I'm going to switch to a smaller brush because it's just, there's so many tiny little details in here that I'm going to switch and just work with my 2-0 brush because that's what I feel comfortable working with. Oh, look at that hair on my palette. Too many animals. These little guys are so great. They're so expressive. And you can see I went back and I'm putting in a little bit of that red just to make things a little bit more interesting. I know I've talked about faces in my face video, but it's always good for you guys, to keep hearing it, is that thing about your highlights, placing your highlights. So a lot, on the eyebrow here, especially with this guy, he's got such good sculpted proportions, and then here on his forehead to bring up those colors, those highlights. And here on his lip, on his nose, under his eye. And I'm kind of doing a little bit of the stippling like I was with the bigger brush, which is the act of, you can see I'm kind of dotting the paint onto the miniature. I've been doing that a lot more with skin tones lately just to give them more texture. All right, I've got a little magenta. I'm putting a little magenta here just because I want to break up that green. That's the other thing. You know, you have so much of this green skin tone color. So really pushing the magenta into the shadows. Just making things visually more interesting. He's already looking cool. And this side of his jaw is much easier to paint on camera for you guys. Because there's really, his arm isn't obstructing it. Here I just took the straight skin tones there. And if I feel like I've pushed my highlights too much, I just go back in with the green and I take a layer and I smooth it back over, and it's just that give and the take. I'm actually gonna put a little bit of red up under his eye here. Pretty sure this model he's got one eye open and one eye closed because he's going to throw this bomb. So kind of like he's taking aim. So I think also how you apply the paint to the miniature depends on how the miniature is sculpted. This miniature has a lot of detail in the sculpt, so you can get away with not having to smooth the paint and it still looks awesome. That's what I find is so fun about the Big Child miniatures is they have all this detail sculpted into them. So the paint just enhances all that detail. The other great thing about green is green's not a super hard color to blend. It, you know, it doesn't really give me too many problems. I find that it's not gonna get really, at least I haven't had green get chalky on me when I try to bring up the color for highlights. So that's a bonus for you guys if you guys are painting skin tones. Green might be a good place to start if you want to practice painting skin tones, and I know they're not human, but it's still the same idea of giving your skin tones lots of different colors. This goblin kind of has like dad bod going on. He's got a little bit of stomach, which, you know, I think probably, as far as goblin terms, like, they're okay with that. They're okay with being a little bit rounder with their stomachs here. They like cheese. That's what I'm going with. Cheese goblins. So what I'm doing is, like, you can see I'm going back and forth here. I keep adding a little bit of the old rust. Again, just to make things more interesting, just to break up all of that green. And I'm also going to put some here. So if you think about it, it's kind of I'm applying the same rule to these guys as I would humans, is that usually on elbows and around the hands, like the knuckles, you get a little bit more pigmentation, you get a little bit more color. You know, on the insides of hands, you know, my hands are a little bit warmer color, warmer red than they are on the outside, but you can see, you know, I've got a little bit more red here, down around the tips of my fingers. Same thing with knees. On, you know, regular human colored flesh tones, a lot of times I'll do that. I'll put in some magentas or some reds. And I did some on his belly too. But I also put some in his hand here. And again, remember to paint in smaller and smaller areas to bring up your highlights. Right now I'm kind of on my midtones. You can see I've been adding a little bit of the yellow. And I'm hitting right here on his hand and then on the tips of his fingers. There. I'm leaving the middle of his hand a little darker and focusing my highlights here on the tips of his fingers. I'm just giving the inside of his mouth a little color, just so we break up all of that green in his face so it looks better on the video, so you guys can kind of concentrate on those colors. I'd also take some of my reds and go along the edge of his mouth here. So I'm really going to try to put in some detail here on his stomach, just make it more interesting. Some skin detail. Like I'm going to go really heavy on the stippling. I will actually zoom in for you guys so you guys can see. And what I'm doing is I'm putting in this texture, and it's the same idea behind the layering. Is I work my way up and I do the little dots and I bring, this color down almost all the way, but I do a little bit less stippling around the outsides. And it's more concentrated here on his belly, near the top where the sunlight is going to catch. I'm going to get his belly button right there. And now I've switched to some of the yellow. also going to do the same thing, and I'm going to do the same thing with the red. So I'm going to give him some little spots. And that's how you can have a little bit of fun with texture there, especially with skin tones and on nice big surfaces like that. Alright, now I'm going to finish putting in my highlights. I've got his legs here. Well, I'm sorry, putting in my midtones because we haven't added our highlights yet. Well, like I said, I'm pretty much focusing on the front half of him, just to keep the video from being really long and putting you guys to sleep. Okay, now that we've worked up to our midtones, I'm going to come back in. I'm going to add a little bit more magenta here and there where I feel like I need to put it back in, around his kneecaps. And then here, sort of in the shadows. And you know, I kind of put it in areas to also break up, you know, shapes. So I've got this part of his skin, and then I go back and I add a little bit of this magenta color under his chin here, and that kind of separates his face from his stomach area with all that green color. So it makes it more visually interesting. Now I'm going to switch between my yellow oxide here and work up to my buckskin pale. And again, this is smaller and smaller areas, just barely touching. Just putting those final highlights in. And then just barely on the tips of the fingers. Come around here on his hand. I'll go back in. I feel like that's too much of a jump with the highlight, so I'll come back in with that lighter green color that I have just to fix that up. And just for the sake of the video, to make it a little bit more fun, I'm just taking my brightest highlight color and I'm just hitting his little teeth in here. And same thing with mixing the magenta with some of the buckskin pale, giving his tongue a little bit of a highlight. And go back in just a little bit more. Push those highlights a little bit more with the buckskin pale in very small places. And he's looking pretty awesome. And it didn't really take much to make him look this awesome. So you see how much fun you can have with textures and with just some greens, and remembering to just put some colors in that are all sorts of, breaks up all of this and makes it more interesting. The reds here and the reds under the arm. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pure white and I'm going to put my brightest highlights down with this pure white. And remember, the pure white is just barely anything, but it really makes the miniature pop. And if it's too much, I'll even go back in and I'll take the yellow over here. Tips of his ears. And again, bring that yellow over to the white there. And what we kind of were doing with the really bright little highlights of white is we're kind of blending the color harmoniously so it all works together visually, like in a circle. So you're tying it together with these final highlights. I really enjoy doing this. And kind of trick the eye of the viewer. I don't do so much on the feet. I like to focus more on the front of the miniature. More on the face. And then I'm going to do a little bit of a highlight on his tongue. There. So it looks like his tongue is wet. And there you have it. Some really cool texture with the green skin tones. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this lesson on painting green skin tones. Remember to check out our Discord. Hit us up with any questions you have in the comment section or on our Discord. We're always happy to chat. And as always, happy painting.